right, so we're back with Ken and Mike this week. It's been an interesting week
Yeah.
for Alcatraz and the hunt for Ken's uncles, and proof that they not only made it out of Alcatraz, but they existed for a long time afterwards and lived a life in South America. Uh, Also, it was really interesting. A lot of people think, we've been doing the podcast for a while now. This is like episode 47, but none of us have actually met in person. I've never met Ken in person. I never met Mike in person. That's soon to change. Actually, this past week, had the opportunity to meet Mike in person because he flew down because we had something very significant happen this week. And I'll give you like the headlines. Everyone we've been talking about that postcard, the infamous postcard that was sent from Canada in 1973. It was 73? 73. In 1973, which was interesting because it was a postcard that was made in the U.S. But was postmarked from Canada, a Canadian stamp. And the front of the postcard, if everyone remembers, there was a image of Jesus knocking on a door. It's kind of a hologram. It's like one of those cards where if you turn it one way, just like the image moves as you turn it back and forth. And as we've talked about in this podcast, it was an image that Ken's grandmother was familiar with, and the family was familiar with. And it was sent to her shortly before she passed away, correct?
Well, it was actually sent to my mom. So
Oh yeah, it was sent to your mom.
sent
That's
to my
right.
mom. Right. And the person who sent it to her, for the longest time we always thought it was from Helen's sister Ruth, who my mom only knew. Oh my gosh, she said she might have met her once in her whole life, and never had any other correspondence with her. Never. I mean, that one time. And it was, it was, like I said, it was right. She received it the same week that my grandmother died. Well, it was the same week that my grandmother passed away. She didn't receive it, in the mail until after we got back from the funeral. But it clearly had been postmarked and mailed days before my grandmother passed away, and just very, very odd, strange.
Yeah, the timing is really strange. It's really strange. And so what was significant about that postcard is what we've all been talking about, is that you can clearly see that there's two stamps, one on top of the other. And so that was kind of interesting. So what Mike and I did this week, Mike flew down from San Jose down here, and we went out to just probably about an hour and a half east of Los Angeles. And we took that because we've been talking about testing the DNA on that and trying to get information and DNA off that. So we met at this DNA lab, a private DNA lab. This lab was recommended to us by a dear friend of ours and also cold case investigator, Cheryl Mack McCullum, and who works on tons of cold cases. People in the true crime world, I mean, everybody knows who Cheryl Mack is, McCullum. And we brought it there to have it analyzed finally after, 40 some years, almost 50, that this postcard, which was, as you indicated, Ken, was in a frame for a long period of time.
Right. Yeah. It was preserved in I think it was like an 8x10, or might have been a 5x7 frame. And the strange thing about this too is when my mom discovered it and called me and also notified my brother about it, it was right before we were going to get together with Art Roderick and another individual. And when Art, we explained it and showed Art the postcard, he was like, "Oh yeah, I think we could probably, lift the stamps off." And because I was telling him even then, I said, if if this was licked by one of the brothers, we should be able to find something up under the stamp. Mm-hmm. And Art took the postcard with him, promising that, you know, he was going to reach out to the FBI. He knew people that could do it. And, you know, weeks turned into months and months turned into almost a year. And I finally said, you know, Art, I'd like to have that back. You know, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to find someone one day to do it. And, you know, fate has it, we hooked up with you and Cindy, and I had met with Cheryl before, and she really wanted me to have it tested. And,
Yeah.
I'm glad it eventually got to this point.
Yeah. You know, so, you know, got to meet Mike in person. He came down with us, went to the lab. We spoke to Suzanne. I can't, for the life of me, I can't remember her last name, but we'll get that. And she was the, you know, lab technician. She does this for a lot of high profile cases. And it was very interesting to hear her describe the process of how she's going to do this. And, you know, and like any kind of good, you know, person, lab technician, she wasn't making any promises. She was just saying, you know, well, this and that, and, you know, this could happen, and this has to happen. It's like very interesting how they kind of, and I know because they don't know what they're walking into. She did say the fact that the card was preserved in a frame for so long is huge, because that means it hasn't been handled. It also wasn't, you know, it wasn't stored in like a box in a hot attic somewhere, or, you know, it looked, you know, she said it looked really good, preserved really well, which is going to help the process. And then she started telling us what she was going to need to do in order to yield any kind of DNA results and get a sample. And Mike was there, and he talked about first steaming off the stamps. And she was pretty confident that there would be some sort of DNA on the stamps, because, you know, I mean, people still lick stamps, but most of them are self-adhesive now, and self-adhesive stamps have been around for a long time. But, you know, back in the 70s, and, you know, everybody licks stamps. Everybody licks stamps. You know, it's like, and they used to have some people, if you licked a lot of stamps, you always had a sponge nearby, and you would just like wet the sponge, and, you know, that was the process then. So she was pretty sure that there's going to be DNA. And so it was interesting to hear her take on this. And then I don't really think she knew the gravity of the situation, even though we've kind of been on the phone with her. Cindy's been on the phone with her, as well as some other DNA texts for the past month, explaining what we need to do and stuff like that. But when we physically got there, we wanted to kind of go into the lab and watch her. And she goes, "No, you can't do that. It's a clean room. You just can't do that." So we were like, "Okay, well, so just take some pictures, video if you can." And so, but when she started realizing the gravity of what she was doing, that the results, if they come out positive in our favor, is going to be pretty huge, as far as kind of the punctuation mark that we've been looking for to really settle the mystery of what happened to your uncle. So, Mike, I just want to talk to you about, because, you know, what you thought of the experience. And I know we didn't get a chance to go in the lab, but just the fact that we're at this point, that, you know, that Art Roderick had this for like a year and a half and never got it tested. And for a variety of reasons, probably because it wasn't just a big priority for him, and not that he didn't want to do it. And then, you know, maybe he couldn't find somebody, and the cost factor or whatever, and that kind of thing. But what was it like for you to come down and finally see that, you know, we have this picture now that we really believe that meets all the benchmarks of all of what we think John is, but now we may have definitive proof of his DNA, or one of their DNAs on this stamp.
Well, one of the things that struck me when we first drove up to the facility where they, you know, have all their equipment and testing and so forth, is how nondescript it is. It's this little building. It's like a little business building that I think there's 3 businesses.
It's like a bungalow.
Right. Yeah, it's like a bungalow. It's very small. And it's around the backside. We weren't even sure we were at the right address at first, because you couldn't see it from when we pulled into the driveway. The first 2 offices are there, and you have to go around the back. Like, oh, here it is, and kind of tucked in a corner. And then it's just this little teeny sign in the front. I can't remember the name of the business, but
Yeah, that's right. We can. I don't. It's
yeah.
fine.
But anyways, this little teeny sign that doesn't really draw attention to itself. And then you go in, and then it's a nondescript office. It's a couple chairs, a couple plants, and a little counter, and then there's a door to the back, and that's the front. We never got to go into the back area because that actually she had to even key it in herself just to get into the lab area. So you can't just walk in there. It's all very as protected as they can make it, I guess. And I was thinking, sort of contrasting that to the importance of what we were doing, how this is seemingly a little out of the way place where there's nothing important here. And yet in the back where they're doing all where the lab equipment is and the testing, they could possibly rewrite or validate history that we've been proposing, since we've started our Alcatraz journey. And it could just be an amazing revelation as to what they discover. And so far we've gotten a couple enticing pieces of information. Because she could, at the beginning when she was talking about lifting the stamp, again, as Rob said, no promises, I'm going to do my best. I during the process of when we were talking with her, there was also a camera person there who was filming, and Rob was asking her questions, Susanna questions about her, her background, her expertise, some of the prior cases she's worked on. She does a lot with the police, cold cases or current cases that they're very high profile. Also private people go to their lab looking for missing persons or trying to bring people to justice that have evaded justice, and they have, DNA or other evidence that they're examining. So she has a very long background, a lot of experience with these kinds of investigations, high profile investigations. But when Rob was, sort of giving her the information about Alcatraz and the most famous escape in American history, and how we're going to hopefully change the story of what most people believe, that they drowned, then it started to sort of settle on her what the importance of what we were doing. Although she was quick to say that every case she does is important. One's not more important than the other because they all have interested people wanting to get the results that they need. But this one has the weight of history on it that most cases she works with does not. They're more current cases, or their families wanting answers to, things that have happened to their loved ones in the past. But this one is the weight of history. And so, she realized how important this was. So she was like, I'll do my very best. I'm going to be very slow and methodical. I chronicle everything that I do. I'll take pictures. I'll take videos of every single step, just to show that we're following the proper procedures. But it was very exciting to hear, because we were there on Thursday. No, wait a minute. On
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Today's Thursday. On Tuesday, that the next day, she said that she was able to lift the stamp, which was very exciting, because she said, depending on the conditions, that it had, the postcard had experienced for a number of years, although it was very good conditions. It was in a home for the majority of that time, which was, it's not like you said, there's not swings of temperature, like if it's in an attic or if it's in a garage somewhere where it's freezing in the winter and boiling hot in the summer, that could really affect DNA in a very negative way. But if it's in a home, obviously temperature is regulated, so it's more streamlined and more consistent of temperature, no wild swings. And that it was in a picture frame, again, keeping it as pristine as possible. No handling, no touching, not getting wet. Things aren't happening to the postcard just through, exposure to people. So untouched for decades. But one of the concerns she had was the strength of the glue on the stamp. If the glue was really affixed to the cardboard back of the postcard, it doesn't lift very well. It tears it. It's not pristine. And so that's why it was going to take her several hours of dampening the stamp and doing it bit by bit until finally the glue let go and she was able to lift it. And she did lift it. And even better, which was even more of a concern, was that she was able to separate the two stamps, which in my mind was even trickier than lifting it off the postcard.
Yeah.
And so now we have two sources of DNA, which is amazing. It's not just the one.
Yeah. And
And
then what's really interesting, and what were you hoping that second stamp underneath? I remember when we called you yesterday and when we told you what it was. What were you hoping that stamp that was covered by the Canadian stamp was?
You know, gosh, I really was hoping that it was a Brazilian stamp, or at least some stamp that was a foreign stamp. That was my hope. You know, but even if it wasn't, and I don't know how much you want to reveal to our listeners today, but just the fact that she was able to separate the two stamps, which means that whoever licked the first stamp, regardless of what it was, there's DNA now up under that stamp also. So we have a really good chance at finding out, did this come from one of my uncles?
Yeah. Well, I think we can talk about that because we're not going to, obviously, we won't have the results of the DNA, the official DNA, for probably till the end of April. So we're talking like 3 to 4 weeks for that. But I think what's important is that when she called us yesterday morning, she actually called Cindy, and we were, when we left there, she said, well, I'll give you a call tomorrow morning. I'll know whether or not I have a good sample and if I can determine what that other stamp was. So everything that could have possibly went right with her process in the beginning went right. So she was able to remove the stamp, identify the second stamp that was under there, and that was a U.S. stamp, which I kind of thought it was going to be, only because just because it was a U.S. postcard, and the fact that, and we've talked about this before, and that because it was mailed from Windsor, Canada, Ontario, which is literally a stone's throw from Detroit. It's like literally
right across the border.
Right across. I mean, you can see Windsor. You can, like I said, the first time I was in Detroit, I made a wrong turn, went over a bridge, and then someone asked me for my passport. And I go, well, I didn't know I was in Canada, and they let you make a turn. And, but yeah, it was really interesting and to me, my theory is that they were in the States. How they got into the States, I mean, because we know that from some of I think it was the Whitey's letters or something that were Mickey Cohen or who we had from, or maybe Fred Brizzi, I can't remember which one it was, that provided these guys with, when they got on that plane after they got out of the bay and made it to plane, that there was cash, there was passports, there was he had set them up so they were able to, cross borders if they had to and show documentation. So I thought that was, and so if that's the case, if they had foreign passports with new identities, they could travel across borders, because like in the 70s, unlike today where everything is so electronic, facial recognition, they can kind of track you everywhere. Back then, they didn't really track border crossings the way they do now. So they theoretically could have made it. And plus, if they're under an assumed name and another fake identity, it wouldn't really come up. So they could have been coming back and forth. And there were reports, like you said before, that they were jumping back and forth into the country when family crises happen, like when your grandmother died and stuff like that. And so they were. I can imagine that in a place where if they had fake passports or new identities, they could have been coming in and they were in the States and they were up there and they were having a good time or living their life and decided and that your grandmother was feeling ill and they didn't know whether or not she died yet. And they knew that all the family was gathering. This would be a great opportunity to kind of just send our thoughts in like a code vis-a-vis the Jesus stuff, the Jesus card and stuff like that. So, and literally, and then they probably bought the card, they were going to mail it, they put the stamp on it, and they go, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should send it from Canada. It was like a last minute thought, just almost like as a head fake to anybody, because they were always so crafty and very, they were always thinking of how they could possibly get caught. And so to me, it was just kind of like a head fake to the authorities. If for some reason they confiscated the card and they say, well, where's this card from? Who's it from? Who's Ruth? Because your family had been under surveillance for such a long time. And then even when they were not under surveillance, your family was always cautious because they didn't know whether or not they were under surveillance.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting that they found a USA stamp on there. I think she said it was like a 6-cent postcard stamp or something like that, whatever it was for you, because it was 73. I don't know. Postcard stamps are always a lot cheaper than a regular stamp. And but yeah, I thought. What do you think about that, Ken?
There's so much strange about the postcard itself. If you buy a postcard in the United States, let's say you're in Detroit and you have a U.S. stamp on it, why not just drop it in the mail then? Why do you need to travel across the border into Windsor to buy a Canadian stamp to mail it? And then, you mail it to my mom from an individual that she really didn't know and has never had any other correspondence with before or after. Whoever wrote that postcard, and there was more than one person because they do reference we and us. They knew that my mom and myself and my younger brother were at my grandmother's house that week before she died. How they had that kind of knowledge, I don't know. And then they use an image on the card that is very similar to an image that was in my grandmother's house. So just the whole story is that, I never really even knew that that's what it was in that picture frame for all these years. And, when we found out what it was, it just right off the bat, my brain started running. This doesn't make any sense. Why in the world would someone send you this postcard out of Canada? It's not even a Canadian. If I was traveling in Canada and wanted to send my mom a postcard, it would be something around the Canadian scenery or something.
Yeah,
something. It wouldn't have been a picture of Jesus
knocking on the door.
It's just crazy. And so even though the stamp didn't turn out to be what I thought it and was hoping it was going to be, I get the impression that and feel like that we're going to find that DNA is truly either John or Clarence's.
Do you think, because this is the thing that I was thinking about just now when you're talking, because they knew that the family was down all gathered together for your grandmother and stuff like that. That's kind of like, correspondence. Let's just say, they were keeping correspondence with Uncle Man, which I don't think they probably were with a letter. I think he was, to me, I think Uncle Man, because this is the day back then there was payphones everywhere. So, I'm sure if they were speaking, something tells me they were speaking over the phone, whether it's through a payphone and then wherever they were, because you really couldn't track that back then. Yeah. There's no really way, unless you knew where these two people were and you knew where to start tracking it as they're speaking. But you can make anonymous calls from payphones. You can track, but if you didn't know where these calls were being made from and you didn't know when they were being made, you could easily, Uncle Man could have been going to a payphone, calling them, whether or not they're in the country, whether they're up in Michigan or whether they were in Canada, or even if they were in like Brazil or Mexico, he could call them and they could communicate. And because to me, it seems like the information was getting to them very fast.
And that might have been why Uncle Man, when he was close to dying, told my aunt that he was in contact with them for the first 25 years. And it might have been for that very reason, like you said. I never really kind of thought about that. The first 25 years after their escape, they didn't have the technology that we have today. He would have called them, like you said, on a payphone. He could have gone down into Tampa or right outside of Ruskin. He could have picked up a payphone. They would have known to trace that call. They wouldn't have, it wouldn't have been like today, him picking up a cell phone. They can easily trace that now. And it's assigned to a person. So maybe that is the reason why it was so easy to keep in contact with them for the first 25 years. Because I always used to think, well, why did you quit contacting them? But the contacting method probably changed because as the technology got more adapt to tracking people, their activities and contacts were limited.
Yeah. What do you think, Mike?
Well, for the longest time, I always thought it was very intriguing that it's this little town just across the border from Detroit, Michigan. I thought, why would they mail a postcard from there? And so I thought for a long time that the brothers, one or both of the brothers, it was a rendezvous to meet them up there. They meet them in Canada, and the family just goes across the border, across the bridge, across the river, meets with them, and then comes back and then, kind of go about their lives, which sort of suggested in my mind that there'd be periodic times together where the family would sort of meet clandestinely. But with the stamp, the bottom stamp being American, kind of the picture that you painted, I kind of agree with that it seems like they were there in Detroit and we're meeting together, and they get, they have the information about their mother being ill, and they send the postcard in sort of a coded way about, again, like Ken has said, how would Ruth have known where the mother was and that she was not well? Somebody had to tell her this information, most likely from the brothers who got it from their brother, uncle, Ken's Uncle Man. And so they were initially going to mail it, had prepared the, written the postcard, got the stamp. And then at some point between mailing it and, getting it ready, they have a change of heart. They think, hey, if we mail it from here and the authorities somehow find out about it and investigate, they can catch us up here. So let's cover our tracks a little bit better and go to Canada across the border, mail it from there. So if they start snooping around, they're looking in Canada. They're not looking in Detroit. Second thought I had was, and Ken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is something we never talked about in the podcast at all, that when the family was in Ruskin, we've talked about how poor they were and it was kind of a hand-to-mouth existence. One of the things that they would do, I don't know, I think this was a yearly thing, as I recall.
I was just about to bring that up, Ben.
Yeah, they would go up to Michigan to harvest, I think it was cherries, as I recall.
Cherries. They pick cherries once a year.
What?
Yes.
Yeah, up in Michigan.
The whole family went to Michigan.
So the brothers had.
So they knew Michigan pretty well.
They knew Michigan.
Yeah, they went to Michigan all the time.
Yeah, we've not brought this up before, and I didn't really think about it until we started talking about the stamp in Detroit. And
you guys are holding out on me.
Well, we got to dole out the information bit by bit. So it made sense that they would meet there because they knew people, they knew the area. They had firsthand information. So if they needed to get away, they knew where to go.
And one of the sisters, the youngest sister, who and the FBI does know that her husband, he was incarcerated, and my grandmother helped get him out of prison by writing a good letter to the warden. But he is the one that is suspected to being the driver who drove them to the airport after the escape. Him and his wife were out in Alcatraz during that time frame. They lived in Michigan.
Where in Michigan? Where in Michigan?
I can find out. It wasn't that far from
Detroit,
from the Detroit area, but they lived in Michigan. And as Mike said, every single year, even when before the brothers got in trouble, when they were small, they made regular trips up to Michigan to pick cherries during the harvesting time. I don't remember the exact time frame, but even after the escape, I can remember many times my Uncle Man and other family members traveling up to Michigan would stop by our house in Georgia and stay with us overnight as they were traveling up to Michigan. So this was something that they did all the time.
The Michigan connection right there.
If they were truly crossing the border which they could have done easily, to meet with John and Clarence if that was the rendezvous place. That would have been something that would have been a common thing that they did.
I mean, at the time that I was up there in Windsor, I mean, it's very easy to cross the border there. I mean, it's like they don't really do a whole lot of search. I mean, like I probably could have talked my way into Canada if I wanted to stay. You know, I said, well, all I had was my driver's license. And the guy said, well, you could, if you want to go, he says, I could use your driver's license. So back then in 73, I would imagine that was a pretty common thing that people would just pop, like they would commute over there and they would go there for certain things, come back and forth. It was like, so I would imagine it was pretty easy to get in and out of Canada through the Windsor border.
Right.
So I don't think there was a whole lot of checks and balances system back there because, I mean, they're very, 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 they're our neighbor. And, even in Mexico too, back at that time, it's very easy to get back and forth over the border, So this all kind of, it tracks, I think. And then getting back to the postcard and what the forensic tech was able to do. So in addition to her telling us that the stamp was an American stamp underneath the Canadian stamp, she was very excited because she said, it's always a crapshoot. You're not sure if you're going to get enough sample of DNA or whether you're going to get DNA at all. And she said not only did she have a good sample, she had enough for like double the amount that she normally would need. And the one thing she did tell us is the DNA, because it still has to go through another few stages of stuff, which is going to take weeks. But there was male DNA on that stamp.
Nice.
So
yeah,
I think on both stamps. On both stamps.
That was important enough to call us yesterday. It wasn't just, hey guys, I texted us real quick. It's mail. It's like we had a conference call.
Yeah,
it was that important. And when I heard that, I was so shocked, but pleasantly shocked, because I thought for sure it was going to be female. Ruth wrote the letter.
Ruth
was going to lick the stamp.
Right.
And the fact that it's male it's shocking that she would write it and somebody else would lick the stamp. It doesn't usually happen that way. The person who writes is the person who licks, and it didn't happen. So what does that mean? There's a story there. There's something happened between the two events. That the other person would think or would do that. And so that is that is very good news.
It is really good news. It's exciting. I mean, in addition to the photograph and this, like I said, this could be, the smoking gun that we've been looking for. And it's funny because for the longest time we've been trying to track down a relative, which we're still trying to do, by the way. And we're making pretty good headway in that department, and through some other sources and stuff like that. But if you can have some sort of like definitive evidence like this, because DNA doesn't lie, so everything else you could say, well, it's hearsay, I saw this and this, but we have two things that are pretty solid right now. We have that photograph, and it's not just that photograph, there's another photograph too, of John in Brazil under an assumed name. And like we said before, Michael Streed, I reread his report like probably once a day now, because it's just like I'm still kind of.
It's a great report.
It's a great report. It's like it can't.
Very detailed.
Well, yeah, it's detailed, but it's just like check. It checks off all the boxes, and he explains why it checks off the boxes. And then the overlay, when they just overlaid the photographs on top of it, he had his mugshot from Alcatraz, one from the Atlanta Federal Prison, and then the photograph that we were given, and he just merges them together and they all match up, which is kind of bizarre. But on top of that, with this potential DNA proof looming, hopefully we'll hear like in 3 weeks, and it's exciting. It's exciting that we're still finding new stuff. In addition to all the information that you guys have done since you've researched this, like when you started researching this, Ken, and then when Mike came on after the first documentary, and then when you guys decided to write the book and really kind of dig deep and go through all the archives and letters and your family's archives and the Whitey Bulger letters. I mean, and you probably didn't think there was going to be more stuff, but it's like there's still more. And I'm sure that we would probably, as we get into when we kind of solve these two little mysteries, with the photograph and DNA, I think there's going to be more stuff that kind of folds in that kind of proves all this stuff.
Well, and actually, I was going to bring that up with the Brazilian connection and the house that we believe John lived until he passed away in 2016. We have found out a couple of interesting things about the house. First of all, when he passed away, I don't know if his wife died first or she died second, but she has also passed away. Since then, we've been told that the house has been unoccupied, that it's still there, but no one has lived there since then. So our assumption is it's more or less left intact of when the last occupant left. So there's hopefully photographs, documents, just all the papers you keep. And you're touching every surface in the house, fingerprints, hair, whatever. There's going to be a lot of forensic information there that we can investigate if we can get into the house and unlock who knows what we're going to be able to find. And we've also found out that John I won't give his other name, his alias, that he had 2 other homes that he owned. And so again, there are more places for us to search.
Mm-hmm.
And then but then it also begs the question that John, if he is the same person, worked in a John Deere factory in Brazil. We don't know what he did, but could have worked the line, manufacturing tractors, or he could have worked in the office. We don't know, but probably not the highest paying job. So where did he get the money to buy the 3 homes? And the house that we know of, that we've seen a video of, it's in a very, very nice neighborhood, not a poor person's neighborhood. It's a gated community. You have to, there are security that let you in and out. Where did all this money come from that this person was able to buy homes and live in a very upscale neighborhood if he worked in a John Deere factory for a period of years?
Yeah.
So we have the potential to really get a lot of information, which is what we're going to be doing. If we do prove that this, that's John's DNA and that this person in Brazil is the same person, then it's like, we need to find the family and, what are their stories? What did they know? Were they aware of who John and Clarence were? The photographs that they have, the family stories, just there's a whole nother area that is uninvestigated that we can really have a lot of amazing information to get.
Yeah. I was telling Mike when we were taking him back to the airport, I says, you guys are going to have to do a second edition on your book to add all these additional information. I mean, just, it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out.
What will really be interesting is when we do go down to the house and we are able to go through it, if we are able to uncover some item that might have this individual's DNA on it also, if it happens to match the DNA that's up under one of those stamps. So we'll be able to compare the two. Sure.
Well, we'd also be able to, get fingerprints, because we have the fingerprints of John and Clarence because their FBI records. We do have those, so they can do a comparison of just the fingerprints alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, that was the big thing. I was talking to Stuart Fillmore. We were in Texas last week, and we met with him, and I was telling him some of the developments and stuff like that, and he was saying, "Yeah, that house is a treasure trove of DNA and fingerprints and documents, like you said, and photographs, and it's incredible. It's incredible.
And just the fact that it's been unoccupied, it hasn't been sold. There's not another family living there.
Yeah, for like 9 years.
Yeah. So it's just, it just sort of now it's fallen into our lap of, wow, we've got a pristine environment that we can examine. Of course, the trick is we have to get in there, and that's not going to be quite so easy.
No.
And there is a niece that we know of that's the has power of attorney for the home. So there's some kind of a legal situation going on, and that's probably delaying, anybody, selling or moving in, kind of a thing. And hopefully we can get her information and start, building a kind of a correspondence with her, hopefully soon.
Yeah. Well, maybe they have, I don't know. I'm sure they have a version of probate down there, and I don't know how long probate can last. But I don't know if it can last like almost a decade. But it's South America, so you don't know what the laws are down there. But that it may be just in kind of like a limbo, like a financial limbo right now, or bureaucracy or something like that, and they don't know who it really belongs to, even though the person is the power of attorney. Does it belong to her? And there also may be a situation where it may have a lien on it or something like that. So if there's a lot of legal stuff that could be kind of entangling the reason why it's not occupied. But it's crazy. It's just like so we're waiting. We're hopeful. We're glad that the forensic tech is excited, because when she called us, she was very excited because, as you know, Mike, she was doing that kind of technician dance, or like kind of dumbing everything down, saying, well, this is the likelihood of this happening. She was kind of reducing her. We're like, okay, all right, well, here's
do
the
the best
card.
you can, and we'll hope for the best.
Exactly. So the fact
Well,
that
she doesn't want to give false promises. We're describing her, how the postcard was kept, but she doesn't know what happened, and so
exactly.
she's not going to say, well, it sounds like I'll get a lot of information then, and then in the end it's like, I didn't get much at all, and then we feel like, well, then it's your fault that this happened because you said so. She has to really downplay our expectations. Easier to go up than it is to come down.
Exactly. I agree. But she's, like I said, she's got plenty of sample material. She said enough, because remember the process is like, she has to, once she gets it, then if there's enough, then she has to replicate it. She has to duplicate it. So she has a copy of it. And then she takes that copy, and then at one point she can run it through a genealogical kind of system too, which could match up, which could also give us some answers too.
And that's a crazy thing there too, because you realize how close we actually might be to closing this case for good. I thought the picture in 2015, once it was identified by Michael Street so positively, and then in 2022, when Josh Gates had it looked at and it came back even stronger, identification of John. Now we get this other photograph, and it's got even more markers than the first photograph. And now we're talking about DNA. I thought the other photos pretty much put the nail in the coffin, but this will, if one of them comes back, if the DNA comes back to be either or John and Clarence, I don't know how anybody can come to any type conclusion other than they were alive, at least one of them, in 1973.
Yeah. So what's really interesting, what we can wrap up here with this last topic, is that the next step is, and we've already kind of moved on this, because the one thing she said that she needed DNA samples, but we're going to get a DNA sample, a fresh one from your mom, coming up next week. And then also we need to get some male DNA samples from your family. So we're working on that right now as well. And that's probably going to happen, And so she said that'll really help solidify the matching.
What's kind of interesting, I just thought about was, if this turns out to be one of them, and they were up in the Canada area in 1973, that's about the same time frame that Brizzi, at some point in time, flies down to Brazil. It's very possible that they came up from Brazil with him, or that's how they went back, was with him on that plane, because it is known that when he traveled down there were two individuals traveling with him.
Really?
Yes. When he flew down, according to his ex-wife, Judy Brizzi, He did not go alone. Two other men went with him, and she told me one time that the two men in the photo, Brizzi identified them by different names. And she said that the individual that we have been able to positively identify as close as we could, 99.7%, as being John, actually came to her house in 1973, 74, and then left. She had never met him before. He came in with Brizzi, and then he went north. Now, she didn't know where he went, never saw him again, but he did come and spend the night at their house.
Well, that would explain a lot because Fred Brizzi knew how to fly under the radar and get in and out of the country. So I'm sure they did do something like that, because there's reports, your grandmother's funeral. There are other people, when your grandfather died, there's reports of people seeing them there, or people that they didn't know who it was. But why would they be showing up at? Which was it for your grandmother or for your grandfather that they showed up at the funeral home?
Well, they supposedly people saw them at the funeral home. My grandfather in 89, I believe it was 89, he died. And then my grandmother, of course, died 73, right before that postcard, right after that postcard was mailed. And they were reportedly seen there as, the famous dressed as two women. So,
yeah.
And that was at the grave site.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when we were talking earlier about, they were up in Canada, just a week or so before, the mother died when they mailed the postcard. And I thought, how did they get down to Florida so quickly? Well, it would make sense that they got up there through Fred Brizzi. They probably wouldn't have flown, through an airline. So Fred would have flown them up there. He might have been up there with them. And then when they found out of what happened to their mother, flew them down to Florida. And then after that, they head back down to South America. So that makes perfect sense. We have no evidence of it, but it is a reasonable for them to be in very far away places relatively quickly, but also not in a way that's going to get them caught. It would make perfect sense that Brizzi is the conduit for all that.
Yeah. And I don't know what the deal was with flight plans back then, like, for private planes and stuff like that. I don't know how much of a stickler, once you're in the United States, how much you have to, you have to fly. You have to, if you're landing at an airfield, you have to, submit a flight plan. But he's landing at all these weird places. He could be landing in fields and
I've seen this landing strip that he in 1976 crashes his plane as he's bringing drugs in from Colombia, and this is what gets him caught. But the field, it's like you said, it's nothing more than just a little grass field. It's not even a runway. This is where he landed at. But and it was very common in that area for people to land planes there. People who had private planes. There were no towers or anything like that. So you can land and take off, and no one would even know you had been there.
Yeah. Yeah, especially Florida too. There's a lot of them. You have a lot of grass runways. They have these communities where, that have a strip like that divides the neighborhood, and people have their planes and their hangars in their garage, and they just kind of roll out, and there's no flight plan or anything. You just take off.
Well, that runway is still there today. You can get on Google Maps and go right. You can Google Street it right by it, and you can see their little grassy area where planes have landed and taken off before. Still there today. And it was probably maybe 2 miles from the cemetery where all of the England family are buried, including my grandmother.
Wow. So that close.
It's only 2 miles. So it's on the same main road. I don't remember the name of the road. It's Highway something, 3 something. But yeah, it's just right down the road. In fact, when we were doing the shooting for the 2015 show, we met Art at the cemetery. We rode right by it. I remember looking out of the car going, oh my gosh, this is where Brizzi landed his plane at. So it was crazy how close it was.
Yeah. Well, it was a good week for Alcatraz, for our
Yes.
quest to find
Yeah.
out answers.
Yes.
So
A lot of good
the
stuff.
train is running. The last
More-
couple weeks
more
have
to
actually,
come.
the last couple weeks have been really good.
Definitely more to come.
All right, gentlemen.
All right.
All right, so we'll talk next week, and anything comes up beforehand, I will hit you up via text or phone. But exciting times.